All Things Conceivable, a Surrogacy Podcast with Nazca Fontes.
Good morning, audience, and welcome to All Things Conceivable. Today we are talking specifically about how to increase your milk supply with my special guest and mom influencer, Helen Avery. Helen, good morning and welcome.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here today and having this conversation.
Absolutely. I'm so interested to launch this conversation with you because I know that so many women listening today have a real interest, a vested interest in learning more about you in particular, and of course, all things lactation and milk supply. Helen, you have a real passion for, it sounds so odd to say this, right? But a passion for breast milk and breast milk donation specifically, starting back when you had your very first baby. You've had an incredible journey from overcoming low milk supply to becoming a breast milk donor. And, you have taken that experience and you've launched it into a platform where you're able to share many of your lactation tricks and tips on TikTok. And you've touched the lives of so many families by doing so. And what's been truly heartwarming, I think, for you is that you've received countless thank you messages from those moms out there who have benefited from your wisdom on your lactation journey. And so it's a powerful story. You have a lot of videos that you've shared over a period of time, a lot of personal experiences that you've brought to bear. And specifically, I want to talk today about not only the milk supply, but, the tricks and tips about pumping, why you began pumping so early, how you migrated that experience and translated into helping support a second pregnancy by freezing lots of milk and donating extra milk to kind of prepare for that second pregnancy, And so, you've had a lot of honesty, a lot of openness, and you've created a strong connection with your followers and your audience. So let's go ahead and dive deeper into all of this. Let's start with your story. I want to hear it from your mouth and we'll share it with our audience.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Well, my story is hopefully similar to maybe some other moms, and some other moms can feel a connection through it. So my story started about 3 years ago now when my first baby was born. During pregnancy, I had some nerves about breastfeeding, but overall, I thought it would come naturally and easily, and I just had in my mind that I would be able to exclusively nurse, no problem. So I didn't really do any extra research before giving birth. I didn't really plan or prep. However, when he was born, my world was completely rocked, which I'm sure a lot of other new moms can feel that as well. Mm-hmm. So nursing, in fact, did not come easily for me. It was painful. My son had poor weight gain, but I was determined to not give up. I worked with multiple LCs and our pediatrician during the time for the first month after birth. And I was only nursing during this time. I did not pump at all. I wasn't giving my baby any extra milk in a bottle either. And after a month...
And LC, just so our audience knows, that's lactation consultant.
Yes, correct. Yep, a lactation consultant.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
So I worked with multiple. He was born in 2021, like 3 years ago. So a lot of it was online. So that might have been another one of my struggles. So I worked with multiple LCs in person and online. And after the first month of trying to exclusively nurse and make that work for us, my baby was still not gaining the appropriate weight. He was maybe barely up to birth weight. It was pretty concerning at that point. And it was at that point my doctor was like, okay, we need to feed a bottle. It's not really an option anymore. So I was like, okay, we'll keep working on nursing. That's my goal, but I will start introducing formula. So I would nurse and then I would give formula after every single time. And after about a week of that, I just noticed my supply was like almost like nothing. I didn't feel any milk coming in or coming out. So I was like, I need to do something else here if I'm going to be able to have a breastfeeding journey. So it was at 5 weeks postpartum that I decided to try pumping. When I first started pumping, I was getting maybe about 10 milliliters per side. So that's like a third of an ounce or so. My baby needed to drink like a couple ounces at a time. So I started doing research on everything I could to increase my milk supply. I was determined. I think that was one of my main factors. I was very determined. So I started trying everything I could over the next month or so. I was able to double my milk supply. And over the next month after that, I was up to like 50 ounces of pumped milk a day. And this was when I started to turn to exclusively pumping. So I was not latching my baby anymore because that wasn't working for us. And I was just bottle feeding and pumping. And so for reference, my baby at 2 months old was drinking 25 to 30 ounces a day. And I started at 5 weeks postpartum pumping maybe 10 ounces a day. And then at 3 months postpartum, I was up to 50 per day. So from extreme undersupply to a pretty good oversupply. And then how I got into...
Now, is there a reason?
Go ahead.
Very, very quickly, I'm curious. So prior to delivery, you didn't have this idea of, oh, I also need to get a pump. I need to kind of supplement or prepare by having a pump on hand. That wasn't part of your mindset at the time.
No, I did get a pump through insurance for free. It was whichever one they sent me. And I didn't get it out. I didn't wash any of the parts. It was still in the box in the corner. I guess I had in my mind just, listening to friends or my parents that, my plan was to exclusively nurse. And I thought that would work out because that's what I've heard other people do. I didn't really think of pumping as a viable option.
Okay. So you went from, 10 ounces a day when you started pumping to an oversupply of 50 plus ounces a day by month 3?
Yes.
And then what happened?
So then I kept on my exclusively pumping journey. So I wasn't nursing anymore. I was still continuing to pump that amount every day. Then how I got into sharing my journey was kind of by accident. It wasn't intentional. It was just a fun post around actually 6 months postpartum. That was about half a year in. And I just posted a little funny 10-second video to TikTok thinking it would get the standard 200 views. And it was of my morning pump. At that point, I had dropped my night sessions and I would pump in the morning. And when I would pump in the morning, I would get over 20 ounces. So I think in the video I showed I had pumped 22 ounces out that morning. And it was like a little silly background song. And I posted that video. And within the first week, I was at over 1.5 million views on this little silly video. And like 75,000 likes and thousands of comments was the biggest shock to me of
wow.
Women just asking questions. Like, how are you doing that? Like, what pump are you using? Have you always had an oversupply? And it was at that point that I was like, maybe my story is interesting and maybe it would be helpful to other moms to share it. So from there, I just started answering questions with more videos and trying to give tips or tricks or helpful tips for other moms and just build a community and even reassure moms that they're not alone in having milk supply struggles.
Yeah, I would say, it's so interesting, and which was what triggered my question to you about this pump before you even delivered. That, I think it's a little bit of a myth, right? That breastfeeding can just come naturally and be this beautiful journey, and it's going to be easy. And, you have heard of challenges, but, that proverbial, it won't happen to me kind of mindset, right? And then you realize, and I think you're just demonstrating this through your sharing of this initial video, that there's this whole bevy of people out there that really struggle with something that should come, at least we all perceive to come fundamentally to us as women, right? As new moms. And it just doesn't come that way. It is a challenge for many of us. And so, you had this realization through this video, and what you're saying through all of the comments and questions is that there are there's a lot of uncertainty, but also a lot of myths around this. So what would you say are, one, maybe the biggest challenges for lactating women when they start their breastfeeding or pumping journey? And that what are some of the myths as well?
I do think the list is pretty endless here for some of the myths and just hardships of pumping and breastfeeding in general. But one myth that comes to mind, and I believed when I started pumping, was that you just won't be able to produce enough milk with exclusive pumping, and that it wouldn't work long term without latching baby at all. So when I first started, that was completely foreign to me. Like, you're going to breastfeed, but not ever latch baby. And that is completely untrue. It's, at least for me, in my experience, it was even quite the opposite. When I was exclusively nursing, my milk supply did not come in fully. It kept dwindling due to poor latch. And it was only when I started pumping that I was able to increase my milk supply and get it up to a point that I was able to 100% give my baby breast milk and help him grow with that breast milk. So I feel like the idea that pumping is not an option is, completely a myth. And as long as you are pumping regularly, effectively, and often, that you can have a successful breastfeeding journey that way and maintain a milk supply for a long time.
Would you say that that's one of the biggest surprises that you learned in your own journey then, that, you can actually breastfeed without a latching baby, that you can breastfeed almost exclusively by pumping?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And even when I was pregnant and before I had my baby, if you would have said, I'm breastfeeding my baby, then I would only think of nursing. Like, pumping didn't even come to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't even have that as a thought in the way that I do now, where it is a great option for moms and it is a viable choice.
So we started at Conceivabilities, the Milk Bank Challenge, to help replenish milk banks across the country when there was a severe formula shortage. And it's so surprising how incredible this campaign has been for us. And, in reaching out to you and having this conversation today, I mean, you are a Milk Bank Challenge champion of ours. And clearly this is something that's so close to your heart, but it's also reflective perhaps of this very issue that you just brought to light, that people were not aware that you could feed a baby through pumping, that you did not have to necessarily turn to formula. And many people do, and it's a very successful option and a healthy option for many families, but it's because it's an either or, right? Mm-hmm. Either I have to nurse my baby or I have to provide formula. So I think that this challenge and, the awareness that you've brought into the social sphere is so incredibly helpful to women who are new on this journey of, how do I feed my baby? What is going to work for both of us to create a happy, healthy family? So what are some of the key steps that you've learned along the way that establish, aside from just, yes, I pump, but other key steps to establish a strong milk supply in the early days of pumping? Are there kind of other techniques that you brought to bear that you want to share with others?
So one thing, like, just to touch on your point, I will say is, breastfeeding too can look like so many different things. And it's not only nursing or pumping, but it can also be donor breast milk. That is breastfeeding your baby, whether it's your breast milk or not. It can be tube feeding as well, or bottle feeding. There's so many different ways to be able to breastfeed your baby and options now available. And the Milk Bank Challenge, I think, even brings more light to that, and the fact that you can successfully feed a newborn baby while your milk's not coming in 100% breast milk, 100% breastfed baby with not your own milk, which is incredible. So the Milk Bank Challenge is a big part of that, which is beautiful. So yes, now that I've had... go ahead.
No, finish.
Okay. I was just going to go into that part of, now that I've had 2 breastfeeding journeys, kind of understand a little bit better what it can take to establish a strong milk supply in the early days with pumping or with latching baby. So I feel like the first thing is to make sure that milk is being removed effectively. And sometimes it can be different for different moms. Sometimes the baby does it better. Sometimes the pump can do it better. And I've had both now. So I'm blessed to be able to say that. And another thing is just being prepared early postpartum and understanding the challenges of breastfeeding before you give birth. Maybe having that pump ready to go or your pump parts washed, and just knowing the options of different breastfeeding ways to breastfeed your baby and not being stuck on one idea. finding a pump that can effectively remove the milk, or working with an LC in your baby to be able to effectively remove the milk by latching. There's just so many different options now, but just understanding the importance of effective milk removal as soon as you can after birth is, in my opinion, the most important thing.
And let's talk a little bit then about, figuring out, how to time, how to hydrate effectively. I mean, there's so many variables, right, that can play a role in a healthy milk supply. So let's talk a little bit about what you've learned with some of these. Like let's talk about timing, for instance. Is there a particular schedule that you think works best from your point of view?
I do think that the schedule can be dependent per mom. And that is the nice thing with pumping, I will say, is that you can build your own schedule around your desired time frame. And it's not necessarily dependent on when baby is hungry. So you do want to follow the normal feeding pattern of your baby for the appropriate age. So for a new mom, building a schedule of pumping every 2 to 3 hours would be effective to establish a strong milk supply. And then there's other tricks with pumping too, like adding power pumping, which is a big one for increasing or maintaining milk supply.
What's power pumping? That's a new term.
Yeah, which I'd be happy to touch on. That's actually one of probably my most liked videos, or like power pumping discussions. So it's a pumping technique that mimics a cluster feeding baby. And it does require an hour's worth of time of pumping on and off in about 20 to 10 minute increments over that hour. And then you'd rest in between. So you pump 20 minutes, rest 10, pump 10, rest 10, pump 10. So that's the definition of power pumping. And what it does is signal to the body that more milk is needed, just as a cluster feeding baby would. So when the baby wouldn't get enough milk, they might nurse for 10 minutes and then come off and then, be hungry again 10 minutes later. It's a way that pumping moms can use a pump to mimic that.
Oh, I just learned something new. Fascinating. All right, so certainly timing then. You're saying that there's lots of variables that you can work with here when it comes to the timing of your pumping sessions.
Yes.
How about things like hydration and food, Helen? Let's talk a little bit about that, because a lot of, I remember back in my day when I was nursing and pumping, from, the older generation to my peers, everybody had an opinion about that. So why don't you share yours with our audience? What do you think what kind of role does hydration and food play in maximizing milk production?
Yes, and I think hydration and nutrition are very effective supplements to the schedule and effective milk removal. So it's not like hydrating and food are going to build your milk supply by just doing that. It's something that you can add on to an already effective schedule to even give you another boost and make sure your body has what it needs to be able to increase supply. So staying hydrated and eating enough calories in general is essential. And dehydration can lead to a decrease in supply, but overhydration is not going to give you more milk. So it's a balance there. You don't want to overdo it, but you also could see negative effects if you underdo it. And I also feel like that's something that's going to play into stress as well. That if you're not eating enough food, but you're also trying to get calories out of your body through breast milk every few hours, that's going to add another stress layer to your body. If you don't have enough food or water coming in to be able to do that. And I feel like that factor is very important on breast milk, just making sure that your body does not feel stressed by the additional requirement of breast milk every few hours.
I can imagine stress playing a significant role, right? It's a stressful situation to be in for mom and baby, and it can be just this, downward spiral. So I think managing that stress is absolutely paramount to the success of a breastfeeding journey, for sure. Let's talk a little bit then about the actual mechanics of pumping. We've got the pump, we've got the maintenance, we've got the cleaning, we've got the kind of pump. How about even when, after you pump, kind of storing the milk? There's so much that go into the mechanics of pumping. So let's start with the pump itself. Do you have any particular brands, styles, anything that you liked that worked for you best?
Yes, I definitely do. I definitely have recommendations now, especially as being online, and I do a lot of videos that are like no BS pump reviews is what I call them. And I love getting pumps that I can just trial and see how they compare to each other. And the pump that my number one recommendation, and it's been that way ever since I've been online at all, is the Baby Buddha pump. And that is the one that I switched to from my first pump that I just got through insurance and didn't really care. It's just whatever one they sent me in the mail. I switched to the Baby Buddha pump around that 2 months postpartum, and that's when I did start to see the most difference in my milk supply and my milk output. This pump was stronger. It is portable, but it's stronger for me, and it has a unique pumping pattern that was more similar to a baby's pattern, and it really helped me get a letdown. With my other pump, I was struggling even like starting a letdown, which just means the milk just starts flowing either to the baby or into the pump. So I think the strong suction plus the unique pattern helped me start a letdown, and it really played a huge impact in helping me increase my milk supply and have a successful pumping journey.
So you've gone through quite a number of pumps over the years, trying to find one that really worked for you. But you found it early on. It sounds like you found it early. It worked well. You continued to experiment with others, but you went back to this particular brand.
Yes. I'm very thankful that for all the pumps I've been able to try, and there are many good options out there. But for a number one recommendation, I keep coming back to the Baby Buddha pump, which at the time when I got it 3 years ago, I think it was pretty small or not very well known. I remember I even told my lactation consultant at the time that I bought this new pump when I was still working with her, called the Baby Buddha, and she didn't even know of that brand. So I was like, I kind of almost felt like I found something like super special that was able to help me. And that was another thing that I'm like telling moms online. I'm like, this might be a great option for you too, because it was for me.
And how about cleaning the pumping equipment? I saw your TikTok about cleaning the pumping equipment. I mean, moms are busy. Maybe they're busy at home, maybe they're busy outside the home, but how can they optimize their time with the right tools? And how does cleaning play a role? Because it can be labor intensive sometimes.
Yes.
To clean the equipment.
Yes. Yeah. Exclusive pumping is not only time consuming, but also the cleaning part is just as time consuming. So that was one of my struggles when I first started pumping. And especially pumping for a newborn or pumping for milk donations, you do need to clean your pump every single time. So I know there's some hacks floating around that you might be able to recommend for a baby, an older baby, that you don't wash them every single time. But for, milk bank donations or a young baby, you need to. And that means washing, and I was sanitizing. You don't have to sanitize every time, every 3 hours, which is pretty crazy and very labor intensive.
A lot.
Yes. So one thing that I actually just got this year that has been a little bit life-saving for me, or time-saving, is the Mom Cozy bottle washer. And I actually post about it pretty often because I do use it every single day. So I'll just turn on my camera as I'm washing bottles and putting them in there. So this Mom Cozy bottle washer does all of the work for you. It washes, sanitizes, and dries all within an hour and a half time frame. So all you do is rinse the milk out to get a little bit of the residue out, put the bottles in the washer, and within 1.5 hours, they are completely dry. So that way you can take them out and pump again. And that was one thing that when you're washing and sanitizing parts, that you also need them to be completely dry before you use them again, or else it can ruin your breast pump if any water gets sucked in. or if you put them into the cabinet wet, it could also create bacteria growth. So having dry parts is like a big thing. And having a machine that can do it all for you within a 2 to 3 hour feeding window, I think is pretty amazing. And it is a little bit of an investment, but if you're pumping that often, it can save you, I feel like, an hour or more a day because pumping is, or cleaning,
it's a lot of time.
Yeah, cleaning and sanitizing is very time consuming. So there are a couple options.
I would say,
just to help save sanity, there's a couple options now.
yep, there's a couple of pieces of equipment that you can buy to kind of minimize the time you spend cleaning, sanitizing, drying, putting away all the equipment. It's a lot. It's a lot for anyone. So I'm going to venture to say if somebody gets into the groove and they are going to deploy many of your tricks and tips that you've shared today to increase their milk supply, there's a good chance that they're going to find themselves in an oversupply situation, perhaps if they're lucky. And, before we go into talking about being in the very luxurious position of having oversupply and perhaps even pivoting and donating to a milk bank, I want to talk about your story in particular, about your second journey and how you tried to get ahead of the problem that you experienced early on with your first pregnancy and breastfeeding your baby. So let's talk a little bit about how you did that and how you prepared.
Yes, those have been some of my more interesting videos too here the last half a year or so, is how I started prepare to pump and be able to have enough milk, help my milk supply come in. And what I started to do with permission from my doctor was pump while I was still pregnant, which is, I think, a new thing. It's but colostrum collection, or the first milk that comes in, is becoming more like well known, and people are becoming more interested in this option. And pumping has been said to maybe help induce labor or induce labor if you don't want it to. So that's something that's like you always need to talk to your doctor before doing anything like that while you're still pregnant. But while you're pregnant or directly after you give birth is a great time to introduce pumping if you want to build a stash if you're going to be returning to work. If you have help and you have someone else that wants to bottle feed, it's a great time to introduce a pump. But like I said, it might introduce a little bit of an oversupply. So if that's something that you want to build a little bit of a freezer stash, it's a good option. So with my second baby, I started pumping around 39 weeks pregnant and collected just a tiny bit of colostrum, almost nothing. Some moms get more than others. And then when my baby was born, I started pumping a few times a day in addition to nursing. And with that, I was able to start a freezer stash and even freeze a decent amount of colostrum in the first week postpartum.
Fascinating. I love that story because it's not something that a lot of moms know about, I think. Your story was actually the first time that I was exposed to that concept, and it's amazing. So for any mom, new or otherwise, who's in this situation where they want to ensure that they have enough milk to breastfeed their baby, maybe they haven't given birth quite yet, maybe they haven't, they're struggling with their supply, can you hit us with like a 1, 2, 3 sort of tip sheet right away? What are the top 3 things that they should do to try and ensure that they have a good supply of breast milk?
Yeah, the top 3 that I always say is the schedule. So having a schedule of pumping every 2 to 3 hours, especially newly postpartum, and sticking to it, which is hard. So just having the pump schedule, and then 2, having a good pump. So not only the brand, but also just whatever pump you have, knowing how to use it effectively. So knowing the different modes, there's different modes on it, the letdown, the expression mode, sometimes a mixed. So knowing how to use your breast pump before baby is born. And the third is the correct flange. size and flange comfort. And the flange is the piece of plastic or silicone that connects to your body that actually does the work of pulling out the milk. And that size is different for every single mom, just like you would need a shoe that fit you correctly. So the flanges can come in many different sizes, say from 15 millimeters up to like 27, 30, 32. So there's a wide range that you can get there, and you do need to actually have yourself measured or measure yourself at home. There's multiple ways to do that, and finding your correct flange size before your baby is born. I didn't know that either. And there's other ways to make sure that your flange is comfortable. So having a pumping spray or using a food grade oil in your flange can help it be more comfortable, or using a pump cushion can help it be more comfortable. So to repeat that, just the pump schedule, the pump itself, and the flange on the pump.
Love that. All right, listeners. So if you are wanting to get more connected to this idea of pumping to increase your milk supply, there's a top 3 ways you can begin that. I mean, I think that there's so much information. Sometimes people just want to know, where do I start? What are the first 2, 3 steps I can take? So super helpful, Helen. Thank you for sharing that. So let's pivot in our last few minutes and talk about donating your breast milk. Tell us a little bit about how you got tapped into this concept and your journey donating your own breast milk.
Yeah, when I started having the oversupply and every single day I was freezing maybe 20 ounces a day, it really adds up over time. And I started building this stash in my freezer, and I was like, what am I going to do with this milk? And I looked up different ways that I would be able to make a worthwhile contribution in some way with my milk. And I found my local mother's milk bank that is in the same state as me. And it looked like they were looking for milk bank donators. And it was in 2021. And I feel like the COVID shortage and like all these other, everything else going on, it was a very needed thing at the time. And I was like, this is a way that like I can make a difference and I can help. And just in my mind, after everything that I went through and being that mom that needed a way to feed her baby early on when my milk supply didn't come in, to then having the opportunity to give to other moms in that same situation in that one breastfeeding journey is so amazing in my mind. I was like, I want to be able to give back. So I applied to be a milk bank donor, and you have to go through a little bit of a process there. And then I started just sending in boxes of milk. It was shipping them. So I'd get a cooler in the mail, fill it up with frozen milk, label it, and then overnight ship it to the milk bank. And that was a way that like I knew that my milk was going to the babies that need it most, including preemie babies, babies with weakened immune systems, and the babies that are in the hospital that maybe their mom is not able to produce milk. Maybe she doesn't want to, and breast milk is very needed for those babies at that time. So it's a way for moms to help other families in need give something to their babies, to help them get the best start in life. And breast milk, the way that the milk bank described it to me, is it's a living fluid, and it can be life-saving for these new babies. The same way that a blood transfusion is life-saving for someone who needs it. Especially in those early days, donated breast milk can be that thing that helps that baby make it through to the next step. And just to be part of that was such a gift to me, to know I could do something like that.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And I say this over and over again to anyone that will listen. 1 ounce of breast milk can feed, that provides 1 meal for the tiniest of babies in the NICU. So every ounce can be life-saving. And the more, lactating women realize this and can potentially share in their oversupply of milk, it really, truly helps to save lives. So it's so important. This has been one of the most rewarding initiatives that we've ever launched in our company. And, for you especially, Helen, you've been such a champion of this initiative, and we together have partnered to save lives. So for our listeners out there, if you are lactating, please consider becoming part of our Milk Bank Challenge and helping to impact families everywhere. So, Helen, you have just been so remarkable, not only in your own platform and your own audience and helping raise awareness in terms of how to increase and maintain milk supply. But you've truly given a lot of moms hope out there when they were really struggling with something that is just so complicated, so emotional, and really difficult, especially in those early days of new motherhood. It's really, such a remarkable thing today where we have social media that we can reach people that really need that support when it matters most. So thank you for being out there and sharing your story and your journey and being so impactful. And before we sign off together, I want to ask you, in this journey that you've shared, can you point to maybe a singular or the most rewarding part of sharing your story with your audience? What's been the most rewarding for you in that regard?
Yes, I've received many messages, and now I would say I receive daily messages from moms saying that my page has either encouraged them or in some way or showed them that it is possible to keep going and worthwhile, and it's given them an extra boost, or that they followed one of my tips and now they're seeing a big improvement with their milk supply. And sometimes it feels hard from my side to keep going and posting every single day, but getting these messages keeps me going, and it makes me feel like I'm not alone in my journey, and it helps other moms feel like they're not alone either. And that we have a whole community, even if it's not in person, but it can be a community online backing us and supporting us and encouraging us. So just those messages that I get from other moms that my video has somehow impacted them and made a difference in their breastfeeding journey or their motherhood journey is the most rewarding part to me, and it's indescribable, and it's very much worth it to keep going.
Oh, thank you for that. And this has been such a remarkable session together, and I appreciate your time and your story and everything that you've brought to our listeners today. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. I very much appreciate it too. I enjoyed being here.
Wow. It's been a minute since I was a new mom learning how to breastfeed my children. And, back then there wasn't social media. And for me, this, the aha moment out of this actually has less to do with the concepts of lactation and nursing and pumping and milk donating, and has everything to do with the power of social media. And in particular, admittedly, TikTok. I have become a huge fan of the platform just based on the amount of support and awareness for such micro issues that are specific in one moment in time to one particular individual, and how impactful a message, a story, a journey shared on that platform can be. And Helen is a perfect example of that. So I really applaud Helen and other creators like her who have found a niche to get the word out and offer support for things that are really meaningful in everyday lives. So thank you, listeners, for joining me, and a little CTA that pumping is hard, but it's incredibly rewarding. And if you are in the midst of a pumping journey and have supply to share, please consider joining our Milk Bank Challenge and make a difference by donating your breast milk to babies in need. Your dedication can absolutely help nourish and support the tiniest of lives. Until next time, listeners, take care.
At Conceivabilities, we believe that everyone who wants to become a parent can. Our agency has helped build thousands of families for nearly 25 years. Whether you are an intended parent ready to fulfill your family destiny, a surrogate answering your calling, or an egg donor wanting to expand what's possible in your life, we are your people. See how matching matters. Learn more by joining our Surrogacy Learning Center community at surrogacylearningcenter.conceivabilities.com.